Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorjan. I'm here with London Paul. And Paul, it was kind of interesting because last night we finally had the retaliatory strike that was supposed to come from Israel on Iran. But in reality, it was more like the play out in the world of US-backed armaments versus what an S-400 can do to defend a city. Anyway, Paul, I want to thank you as always for being a part of this discussion. And while we're not going to call it purely a nothing burger, it certainly didn't live up to all the hype of the last month.
Well, firstly, Ken, obviously, thank you for joining me as well. I'll be quite happy to say it was a non-event. I'm quite happy to actually make that statement because in reality it was. Now, obviously, let's go back to the 1st of October when Iran launched very heavy missile strikes on Israel. They hit military targets, they avoided civilian targets. They were very precise, and their missiles breached the Iron Dome to quite a significant proportion of the missiles that were fired. It therefore exposed the fact that the Iron Dome is not this invincible defense system, which the Israelis have always claimed. And in the process, of course, the Israelis spent enormous amounts of missiles in trying to shoot down these Iranian missiles, and bear in mind, of course, the hypersonic missiles. So they largely are incapable of shooting those down, which is the same problems the United States has with Patriot. No one knows with that because it's never been used in a situation of combat, as it were. So coming back to what the Iranians did, it exposed the Israelis for the fact that their missile defense systems were weak. Iran also exposed the weaknesses, and the argument is if they'd wanted to, unfortunately they didn't, they could have caused enormous amounts of damage, far worse. And of course, the argument that they said at the time was, well, if Israel retaliates, now, what does that mean is we'll discuss shortly, but then we will respond accordingly, presumably on the basis of to what extent the Israeli response, well, what damage did it cause? What did they target in Iran? And we will take appropriate measures. And if it's a severe response from the Israelis, then we will do likewise back at Israel. So 3.5 weeks or so went by, and there was all these statements that they were going to target nuclear facilities, and they were going to target oil refineries and oil facilities as well. Of course, that subsequently, what a surprise, didn't happen, and this will probably surprise some people, but the United States were hugely influential in preventing them deciding that was an option, because as we said previously, the US effectively said, look, if you do this, we're going to be deemed to be complicit, and then the Iranians are therefore likely to go and destroy all our military bases in the Middle East, and also in the process they'll sink our aircraft carriers, etc., in the Gulf, in East Mediterranean Sea, etc., etc. So that's not happening. And there was a lot of discussion and claims that Netanyahu would ignore the Americans, and to be fair, he largely had. Clearly, this time he didn't. Now, whether that's a combination of reasons, not just what the Americans said, but also internally, because there are certainly some cooler heads inside the Israeli military who fully understand the ramifications of going full in inverted commas, assuming, of course, Israel could even do that, because just look at the geographical distance from Israel to Iran, and countries that closed their airspace said you're not using it. So they're okay. They ended up going via Jordan in terms of these apparent missile strikes last night. But there is all the issue of refueling as well, and that's obviously problematic because of the length of the journey. They need to refuel in the air. So then who's going to assist with that? And the argument is, of course, the United States will do that. Therefore, where the argument comes in, the US is complicit in this. Well, then we come on to the issue of what actually happened last night. And obviously, I think my time, it was around sort of 1 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly, it became evident the Israelis were launching some kind of strikes on Iran. It wasn't clear at that point what was happening. There was also some claims they'd attacked facilities in Syria and Iraq, obviously claiming they're Iranian-based, or Iran has a presence in them, whatever the reason. What subsequently transpired is there was no damage anywhere in Iran. There was apparently no casualties. The claim is pretty much every missile was shot down. Now, Iran itself does have very capable missile defense systems, but we know they have Russia's S-400s, and there was some footage that was doing the rounds online where you could clearly see these missiles, which frankly, when you compare them to the hypersonics, look like they're basically crawling through the sky, and you could see very clearly there was missile batteries shooting these down repeatedly. So at the end of the day, from the Iranian perspective, well, there's no damage done. Yes, Israel made a big deal, claimed they had 100 aircraft in the air and they were shooting at all these military targets inside Iran, and they achieved their goals. And as far as they're concerned, that's the end of the hostilities. We've had our retaliatory action, which sounds a lot like what happened in April, when they did exactly the same thing and made these grandiose statements about their response, which was successful and defiant, and it was a massive response just to placate the media domestically and the people, and also just to try and convince the world that doesn't believe this, that Israel has a formidable army, military, intelligence, missile defense system, etc., which of course none of those are true. So then the claim is, and this we'll have to see whether this actually pans out that way, but the Iranians have been pretty quiet about it since obviously this incident happened last night, and now apparently they're saying, well, we're not going to respond, and this is my words, not theirs, we're not going to respond to the no strikes that Israel conducted in Iran, because they didn't target any nuclear facilities, they didn't target any oil refineries, they didn't target any civilian sites. They tried to hit certain military sites and failed. Apparently, literally in totality. Now, okay, there's propaganda and maybe 1 or 2 missiles got through, but effectively, they were completely unscathed. And that's kind of where we are. There's a whole other discussion, which I'll come on to shortly regarding this, Ken. But obviously I want to give way to you so you can comment accordingly as well.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, what are the different purposes, reasons behind a retaliatory strike? If this was a serious affair, and if Israel was going to be serious, they wouldn't have waited nearly a month before they did it, US or not. So they knew that deep down, what Iran had done was just a show of force to let Israel know we are capable, and, don't mess with us. Israel, of course, has to deal with an internal strife. They're dealing with domestic uprisings and a populace that really doesn't want this conflict to continue. More, you see in the media the ones that are crying out for their, hostage loved ones. But for the most part, the people within Israel want this to be over. You've seen multiple protests, And more often than not, a retaliatory strike is a way to appease your populace that, hey, we can strike back at those who attack us and yada yada yada, and quell things over. A lot of it is presaged by propaganda, and then it's post-saged by propaganda about, well, we successfully did what we needed to do, now it's over. Iran had to do its initial strike because of a number of different things that were a true attack on the leadership of Iran. And the populace wanted some type of response. Iran eventually did it, and then they stopped, and it quelled all thoughts and suspicion. Now the people are going to see, well, we are well defended. Israel threw quite a bit, saved up for a month and threw this at us, and it didn't really do anything. They're not going to require a retaliatory strike the way the initial one did a little over a month ago. Or about a month ago. So I think that's what's the importance here. The other thing is leadership within Israel. You'd never know their mindset, their psychological mindset. Do they have an absolute hatred of Iran and they're willing to do this no matter what, even if it sees their own destruction? You can't speak on that. My thing is probably they're more looking at their political lives and the objectives they want for the region, rather than to try to foment an all-out war with Iran. But their retaliation was something they felt that was necessary. Craters.
Yeah, and I lost you there for probably 30 seconds.
Oh, yeah, I think I just got a notification that the internet was unstable. The whole point behind that was primarily the retaliation that Israel did probably was inevitably appease the populace, that they did something. Iran, since they weren't really damaged at all, their population is not going to even, I think, question this at all. They're going to say, okay, hey, we're well protected. We don't care. And hopefully, going forward, there's going to be a look at ending the conflict in some form of capacity, either slowing it down or coming to some type of ceasefire, rather than an escalation. Because more than anything, I think Iran has proven to Israel without a shadow of a doubt that they would lose that conflict, and they would lose it very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the question is, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that Israel's missile defense system is useless, and Iran, as you rightly say, is more than capable of protecting itself. It also poses a huge threat or potential threat to Israel if there was another retaliatory strike from the Iranians. That's an obvious case in point. You're absolutely right. The argument should now be the Iranian people are not going to demand any retaliation. What it also shows is fundamentally the weakness of Israel, because they thought they could go and kill the leaders of, like, Hezbollah, Nasrallah. They could kill political figures, like Haniyeh in Hamas, and somehow that would weaken these institutions or organizations. And it had the exact opposite effect, because they don't understand these organizations at all, because for every person you kill, 5 more will appear and want to join. And the organization isn't very hierarchical, so it's quite diverse. So if you kill one, well, maybe not the leader, but you kill someone who's senior, someone can replace them very easily. And therefore it was a serious misjudgment. But also, I think it's largely was just trying to look like they did something of substance, because Israel's desperate. It has failed in its desire to destroy Hamas. Hamas is as big as it's ever been. They've also failed in their mission, and we've said this before, where they thought they could go in, have a quick ground offensive in Hezbollah, kill whoever they wanted to kill and leave. Well, they're now saying they're going to leave. The mission's accomplished, but it hasn't accomplished anything. It's been a total abject failure. So again, they're trying to cover up the fact of that failure. So everything's been a failure. They, in terms of this idea of going to war with Iran properly, that's not going to happen for one simple reason. They can't do it on their own. They can only do it with the United States. The United States has absolutely no desire whatsoever to go to war with Iran for one simple reason. We're back to that whole discussion of, if they do, the US can't put boots on the ground there. Their aircraft carrier strike groups are sitting ducks. They'll all be destroyed. And with the missile technology and hypersonics Iran has, they can destroy all the US bases all around the Middle East. So can you imagine what that would do? The optics would be so bad. I mean, the US is already now being perceived to be militarily weak because of what happened in Ukraine. Yes, okay, there's been problems in Iraq as well, but to a far lesser extent. They cannot afford to have the optics of another disastrous war starting, which the United States is going to lose. And then there's all the risk of Iran shutting the Straits of Hormuz. People think that's not true and it won't happen. Well, they probably would do so. If they do, the West's financial system is going to blow up because oil will go to something ridiculous like $200 a barrel, and the derivatives markets will blow up in the process. So there's many reasons why the United States is never going to even entertain that idea, not least the US has no support in West Asia at all, except from the Israelis, because everyone else sees them complicit in all the actions of the Israelis and everything they've done, which is irrefutably. I mean, we can say this categorically. They've committed acts of genocide, and everyone knows this. And because the US is seen as complicit, this is being deeply damaging to the United States. So they're basically sat there going, well, you cannot escalate this. You might want to have some retaliatory action. Now, some may argue there was a concocted plan. It was staged. The US got on the phone to Iran and said, okay, this is what's going to happen. So they'll fire some missiles. You can shoot them out the sky. Israel will be happy about this. No problem for you. We can de-escalate the risk of this regional war. But at the end of the day, Netanyahu can sit there and puff his chest out and make all manner of statements. But without US support, Israel's screwed. Rather like if you take the West support out for Ukraine, Ukraine's got nothing. Well, ultimately, the same problem now exists for Israel. They've got no missiles. Without the United States, they've got nothing. Also, their economy is cratering. Their financial system's in trouble. Societally, they've got problems because a lot of people are still trying to leave the country, don't want to stay anymore. And some of those people are high net worth individuals who pull their money out, or people who will have businesses. They'll just close the business and leave. So expertise also leaves. As a result of this, it's hard to tell how many Israelis have left. It might be 2 million. It could be even more. This is a huge problem for the country. So we've learned an awful lot of lessons, and the West has, to stop underestimating countries like Iran and its military capabilities, because if we know what they're capable of, there's no excuse for them not to know. But also, I think there has certainly been cooler heads inside the US. I wouldn't attribute that particularly to the Biden administration. Point about the Biden administration is Blinken has to be seen as the most useless statesman the United States has had in many years. His reputation is nothing. Nobody's interested in anything he has to say. I don't even think the Israelis particularly think that. And he just pops up all over the world trying to sound like he's important, make statements, and no one's listening, no one's interested. And I think largely they're not interested because we've said this before. I think US policy decisions are being made by the intelligence agencies and also the Pentagon. And they're the ones who are going, you are not going to war. This is not escalating. And they're telling individuals in the Biden administration to rein their necks in because it's not happening. And largely that seems to have taken center stage. Fortunately, I'm not saying I'm not going to attribute it to any individuals, but I think there may have been a risk. Certain individuals, certainly in the Biden administration, might have been keen to see a war with Iran, but they were very quickly pointed out to them, if you see what Iran's been doing in recent months, are you aware of their military capabilities? Do you understand the size of their army, which is well equipped? There is no way we can ever contemplate going to war, and that's with Iran. And I made this point on the 7th of October 2023. This is not some backdoor for the United States to come in and go to war with Iran. They cannot go to war with Iran, and they absolutely don't want to. And 12 months later, it's the case, because that's understanding why they can't go to war, what the ramifications are for doing so. So the question now is, what happens? Does Iran respond? Okay, if the claims are they're not, then it all dies a death. So then the question is, does Israel try and provoke Iran again? Well, I think they're skating on very thin ice if they try to do that. I'm not saying they won't. They obviously can't win a ground war in Hezbollah. Yeah, they can keep flattening it with bombs, but the outrage politically, and people say, well, it's just outrage. Well, in the end, the outrage wins through. And in the end, Israel risks not just total isolation, but eventually the proverbial straw is going to break the camel's back with this. So the United States has made this clear to them. You are pushing what you're doing beyond the limits of what the world's prepared to tolerate. And at some point, there are going to be ramifications. When that happens is anyone's guess, and at the moment, it doesn't matter. But the point is, when does Israel sit there and go, well, Iran's off the table, Hezbollah's off the table, we can't defeat Hamas, so I think we're going to have to look for some peace settlement, and because they won't have any other option, because if this war continues just because the Netanyahu and maybe others want to save their political careers, well, the risk is, if it carries on, Israel as a nation state, its very future becomes more and more precarious. And I think there's enough cooler heads inside Israel who understand this, and there are some cooler heads militarily who understand this, but this was not any show of strength by the Israelis. It's the exact opposite. It was a sign of total weakness, and they made all these sort of bombastic statements about oil refineries and nuclear facilities, and we're going to resurrect the Greater Israel Project. All this nonsense that no one believes, no one takes any notice of. But some of them made these statements because they're absolutely convinced if they push the US to push them, they'd eventually cave in and go, okay, we'll support you and back you in a war with Iran. But they're not prepared to do that because the US is militarily so weak, because of all what it's expanded with regards to Ukraine, what it's already given to the Israelis, and that's just not just missiles, equipment, etc., but all the finance. And the US just can't continue in this vein anymore. It's just totally impossible for them to continue to do so. So even if they wanted to support Israel in a war with Iran, which they don't, they just can't do this. They've got nothing else nearly to give them. So common sense seems to have prevailed, at least for now. But could that change tomorrow or next week? It depends. It's a very complicated situation, what's going on internally in Israel. I think there's huge amounts of people who've had enough, and that's not just the people, but equally Netanyahu kind of realizes once the war's over, his political career is probably over. And then if that happens, then he has to face whatever charges are going to be levied at him, and what the consequences of that will be, we don't know, because everyone's innocent until proven guilty in law, which is correct. But therefore, he may feel desperate that he might try something again. But then the question is, does the Israeli military have any stomach for this anymore? Bearing in mind they've already been warned what the consequences could be, because if they go and try and take out a political figure in Iran, for argument's sake, then I think Iran will respond with all-out war effectively, and then Israel is in serious, serious trouble.
Yeah, the last two things I'll bring up in closing is one, Saudi Arabia. Now, MBS's administration came out with a statement not condoning, the flyover that Israel did to bring about this retaliatory strike on Iran. What does that tell you? That tells you that for Israel to have an all-out war or to be more aggressive against Iran, it has to fly over or travel through other nations to get to Iran. I would almost bet that, especially with some of the stuff that this quote unquote leaked document, or even some of the intelligence that Iran has, that they were in communication with Saudi Arabia and say, you know what, it's likely this is going to happen. Don't interfere. Don't do anything. We'll make sure that that nothing happens on your soil, and you can be clean on it. We know that this isn't you allowing it to happen. Secondly, this isn't 1967 or 1972. This isn't Jordan, Egypt, Syria, the Golan Heights, or any of the other places. This is having to travel logistically over a couple thousand kilometers to be able to get to just the reaches of Iran. Israel, outside of their F-35s, which have limited capacity of flight, and their missiles do not have the capability to conduct a conflict on Iranian soil. With that being said,
I think we've lost Ken again. So sorry, we lost you again there for a bit, Ken.
okay.
So.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the internet is doing today.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess that's a good point to stop anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, Paul, I guess we got that covered. I want to thank you as always for being a part of this discussion.
Yeah, and likewise, of course.
Everybody here at the Sirius Report community, we apologize for some of the breakups. It's one of those where the internet is not playing well with us. We apologize for that. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment. Send this out to anybody you think would be importance. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.